first thing Elena Valente felt on her wedding night wasn't a kiss. It was coarse, cold, and humiliating against her skin. Not lace, not satin, not anything that belonged in the candlelit suite the Moretti family had reserved at the top of their private hotel, where the windows looked out over the city like it was something Dante Moretti owned just by breathing near it. It was a bundle of rags, tossed at her feet as if she were a stray dragged in off the street. Elena stood perfectly still, her veil already removed, her hair still pinned in the careful style the bridal stylist had sworn would make her look like a queen. Her dress was still on her body, heavy with hand-stitched pearls, and the kind of money her father didn't have anymore. The room smelled like expensive wax and whiskey and the faint metallic bite of rain, and Dante Moretti, her new husband, watched her like she was an enemy in a courtroom. His black suit jacket lay over the chair. His tie was gone. The top button of his white shirt were open, revealing a throat that looked like it had never learned the meaning of surrender. His face was carved into calm menace. Dark eyes, sharp cheekbones, that controlled mouth that never seemed to soften even when people laughed near him. Elena had spent the entire day telling herself that whatever she'd heard about him couldn't be entirely true. That men didn't become legends of fear without at least one tender human place inside them. Then he pointed at the rags, put those on her throat, tried to close. Excuse me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The air adjusted to him, as if the room itself was trained. I said, Dante repeated, slow, almost bored. Put those on. That dress is not yours anymore. Elena's fingers tightened around the folds of her skirt. This is my wedding dress. His gaze flicked over it like it disgusted him. It was paid for by a man who came crawling to my table, a man who signed you over to me like an apology. He stepped closer, and the sound of his shoes on the marble floor was measured, inevitable. I don't need an apology dressed in pearls. She felt heat rise behind her eyes. Not tears, not yet. Your mother picked the dress. Dante's mouth curved without warmth. My mother picks a lot of things. I decide what stays. The rag sat there like a verdict. Elena's lips parted, and for a moment she was certain she might beg. Not because she was weak, but because humiliation makes even strong people reach for anything that will stop the feeling. But she didn't beg. She lifted her chin. If you don't want me here, why did you marry me? Dante's eyes darkened, and for the first time that night something flickered so fast she almost missed it. Not guilt, not tenderness. Something like hatred that had been trained into discipline. Because, he said softly, your father needed to breathe another day. The words struck her like a slap that didn't need a hand. Elena stared at him, trying to find a crack in his composure, a sign that he was bluffing, that this was some cruel performance. But Dante Moretti didn't perform. He simply was. Put them on, he said again. Or leave. And the thing about Dante's voice was that he sounded as if he didn't care which choice she made, as if both outcomes belonged to him. Elena's heart beat hard, enough to hurt. The suite felt too large, too bright, too full of silent witnesses, candles, the city outside watching with indifferent lights. Her hands moved on their own. She reached for the bundle and lifted it. It smelt like dust and old laundry and something else, Sayun maybe, or smoke. It wasn't one piece, but several. A thin gray slip, a frayed robe, something like a scarf. It looked like what women wore in war photos, like what people wore when they had nothing left. Elena swallowed. Dante watched, unblinking. She didn't change. She let the rags fall back to the floor. I'm leaving, she said, and her voice sounded steadier than she felt. And when my father's debt is paid, you will never see me again. For the first time, Dante's expression shifted just enough to reveal surprise. As if he'd expected tears, anger, a scene, he recovered instantly. Your father's debt, he said, is not paid by your pride. Elena forced herself to walk toward the door. Dante didn't stop her. He didn't reach for her wrist. He didn't speak her name. He didn't ask where she thought she was going. Barefoot, in a wedding suite, with rain beginning to smear the windows, he just watched as she opened the door and stepped into the hall. And that was when Elena understood. There was something terrifying. This was not a marriage. This was a cage, and Dante Moretti had just shown her the as he walked down the hallway in her wedding dress. The hem brushing the carpet, her skin prickling with the awareness that people could appear any second, guards, staff, anyone. But the hall was empty, as if the entire building had been trained to pretend this moment didn't exist. Elena reached the elevator and pressed the button. When the doors opened, she stepped in, breathing too fast, and as the elevator began its descent, she stared at her reflection in the mirrored wall. A bride, a girl sewed for time, Her eyes were wide, her lips pale. The pearls around her throat looked like shackles. She didn't cry until she reached the lobby. The chandelier glittered above her like a cruel joke. The concierge stared, startled, but said nothing because even in public places, the Moretti name was a warning. Alina pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the rain. The night air hit her like reality, and somewhere high above, behind glass and power, Dante Moretti remained in that suite, alone with the rags he'd thrown at her like a promise of what he thought she deserved. Elena didn't know it yet, but that bundle of rags would become the first thread in a story that would ruin men. It would become the reason she vanished, and the reason Dante Moretti would one day find her again, only to discover she no longer fit into anything he could own, not even revenge. She disappeared the way desperate people disappear quietly, quickly, without leaving evidence that could be followed. By dawn, the news in Dante's world was a whisper with teeth. The bride had fled. The Moretti family treated it as an inconvenience at first, then an insult, then a threat, not because Elena Valente was important as a person, but because a missing wife meant a public crack in Dante's control, and cracks were invitations. Elena's father, Matteo Valente, was summoned before noon. He arrived at the Moretti estate with the posture of a man walking into his own execution. His hand shook. His expensive suit didn't hide the fact that he'd lost weight. That stress had carved him down into a shadow in the center of the marble-floored office. Dante sat behind a desk that looked like it belonged to a king. Behind him, the wall-to-ceiling windows framed the states, gardens perfect, manicured, controlled. Even nature was trained in this place. Matteo tried to speak first. Dante lifted a hand. Silence fell like a blade. Two men stood behind Matteo Moretti guard, their faces blank. One of them held a slim folder. Matteo's throat worked. I didn't know she would. She's always been stubborn, but I thought she would understand. Dante leaned back, his fingers steepled, his gaze cold. Understand what, Matteo? Matteo swallowed. That this was necessary. Dante's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he were studying an insect for signs of intelligence. He spoke so quietly, Matteo had to lean forward to hear him. You told her, Dante said, that marrying me would save you. Matteo's face crumpled. I told her it would save us. Dante's mouth barely moved, but his voice sharpened. You sold your daughter to pay for your mistakes? Matteo's eyes filled. I never wanted this. My business, my partners, your gambling, Dante corrected, and the word landed like a punch. Matteo flinched. Dante exhaled through his nose, almost amused. You'll hear is what will happen. You will find her. Matteo's voice broke. I don't know where she went. Dante's gaze went distant for a moment, like he was listening to something deeper than the room. Then he nodded slightly, as if confirming a decision he'd already made. You have 72 hours, he said. If you bring her back, you live. If you fail. He paused, letting the silence finish the sentence. Then you will finally stop being a problem. Matteo's knees weakened, but the guards held him upright by subtle force. Matteo whispered, Please, she's all I have. Dante looked at him without mercy. Then you should have treated her like it. Matteo was dragged out, and the office returned to stillness. Only then did Dante reach into the desk drawer and pull out something small. A photograph. It was a candid image, taken without Elena knowing. She was laughing in it, her head tilted back, the sun lighting her hair. She looked alive, unafraid, like a woman who hadn't yet learned what it meant to be turned into currency. Dante stared at it for a long time. Then, with a slow movement that looked almost like restraint, he closed the drawer and locked it. Because whatever was happening inside him, Dante Moretti had been trained since childhood to feed it to the darkness, and the darkness in his family was hungry. Elena didn't go to friends. She didn't go to relatives, because the Valenti name had become a chain, and any link could be traced. She went to the one place no one would expect a mafia bride to go, the city's oldest women's shelter, tucked between a tire shop and a boarded-up church, where the paint peeled like the building was trying to shed its own history. She arrived in the rain, still in her wedding dress, with her shoes ruined, her hair collapsing, her makeup smudged. The woman at the desk stared at her like she was a hallucination. Elena didn't give her name. She said, I need to disappear. The woman's gaze softened up with pity, but recognition, like she knew this kind of desperation had 1,000 faces, and they all looked like survival. She handed Elena a grey hoodie and sweatpants, and Elena, still shaking, still hearing Dante's voice like an echo in her bones, took them, and went into the bathroom. She peeled off the wedding dress slowly, as if each pearl was a memory being removed. When she looked at herself in the mirror again, she saw something different. Not a bride, a woman who had chosen her own exit. She stuffed the wedding dress into the trash bag the shelter woman gave her. It felt like burying a version of herself. But as Elena walked out of that bathroom in borrowed clothes, she didn't yet realize she had just stepped into a life where she would have to build herself from nothing. And the first thing she would build would be a name no one could buy. For 3 days, Elena stayed in a small room that smelled faintly of bleach and old wallpaper. She ate when they gave her food. She slept when exhaustion knocked her down. But in the quiet moments, the moments where her brain stopped running, she felt something worse than fear. She felt emptiness, because she had been raised to believe her world had rules, even cruel ones, even unfair ones. But rules, and now she was outside them, outside the Valenti name, outside the Moretti shadow, and that freedom was terrifying. On the 4th day, Elena woke up nauseated. At first she assumed it was stress, but the nausea didn't fade. It sharpened, twisting her stomach until she had to press her hand against her mouth and stumble toward the bathroom. When she threw up, she did it silently, because there were other women sleeping, other lives collapsing quietly in the dark. When she straightened, her hands trembling on the sink, she stared at her reflection. Her skin looked paler, her eyes looked older, and something in her mind clicked into place, cold and undeniable. She counted days, she counted again. Then she sat down, on the bathroom floor like her legs no longer belonged to her. She whispered, because the word was all she had. But the truth didn't care about her denial. 2 weeks later, Elena held a pregnancy test in her shaking hand, watching the lines appear with the kind of cruelty only fate could deliver. Positive. Her breath left her body in a sound that wasn't quite a sob. A child that belonged to the man who had thrown rags at her like she was dirt. A child that would tether her to the Moretti world, whether she wanted it or not. Elena pressed her free hand to her mouth, trying to hold herself together, but the tears came anyway, hot, unstoppable, sliding down her face. As she stared at those lines, because she didn't just feel fear, she felt something worse. She felt hope trying to rise, fragile and bright, and she hated it. She hated herself for imagining tiny fingers, a heartbeat, something innocent growing inside her, because innocence didn't survive in Dante Moretti's world. And Elena knew deep in her bones that if Dante ever learnt about this baby, he would not let her disappear again. Not for love, not for mercy, but because the mafia didn't see children as miracles, it saw them as bloodlines, as leverage, as property. Elena curled over the test, shaken. Then she wiped her face, stood up, and looked in the mirror again. I won't let him, she whispered to herself, the words a vow made in a bathroom that didn't belong to her. I won't let anyone own us. She didn't know how she would do it. She only knew she had to, because now, running wasn't just survival, it was motherhood, it was war in Dante's world. The first mistake people made was assuming cruelty was his default. It wasn't control. Was and control required information. By the end of the first week, Dante had Elena's last known movements mapped like a crime scene. The hotel, the lobby, the street cameras, the taxi she'd taken, the area where she'd vanished. His men searched with the efficiency of people who did not believe in failure, but Elena had disappeared into the kind of places money didn't reach easily, places where people changed names like they changed clothes, places where fear was a language everyone spoke fluently. On the 8th day, Dante sat in his office while his consigliere Luca Sora laid out the facts. Luca was older than Dante by 15 years, with a voice that always sounded calm even when he was delivering threats. He wore tailored suits and carried himself like a man who had seen too many bodies to be impressed by violence. She didn't go to family, Luca said. No relatives have contacted her, no friends. Her phone was left behind. Dante's fingers tapped once against the desk. Shelters, Luca hesitated. We checked some. Nothing. Dante's eyes narrowed. Some. Luca met his gaze carefully. You know the rules. Certain places, they don't cooperate. Not even with us. Dante leaned back, jaw tightening. Luca added, your mother is not pleased. Dante didn't flinch, but the air shifted. My mother is never pleased. Luca studied him. She's taking this personally. The wedding was her arrangement. A peace gesture to the Valentes. A show of unity to the city. Dante's mouth hardened. The Valentes are not peace. They're debt. Luca's voice went softer. Debt that can become danger. The rival families are watching. They'll smell weakness. Dante stood abruptly, moving toward the window, staring out at the estate as if the trees might offer answers. Find her, Dante said. Luca hesitated again, then spoke the thing he hadn't wanted to say. If she's smart, Luca said, she'd go far out of state, out of the country. And if she's angry, Dante's eyes flickered. If she's angry, she'll do something stupid. Luca's gaze sharpened. Or something brilliant. Dante went still, because that was the truth about Alina. Valente. She hadn't pleaded, she hadn't begged, she had walked out of a suite that belonged to one of the most feared men in the city, as if she would rather face the unknown than live under his rules. And that kind of pride wasn't stupidity, it was a weapon. Dante's voice lowered. She won't last. Luca watched him. You want her to fail? Dante's reflection in the glass looked like a man carved from shadow. She doesn't understand, Dante said, almost to himself. What leaving means. Luca didn't speak, because Luca knew Dante wasn't talking about the marriage, he was talking about the world itself. He didn't simply walk out of the mafia and keep breathing like a normal person, but Alina had, and if she could do that once, she could do it again. Dante's hand curled into a fist. Find her, he repeated, and this time his voice sounded like something colder than anger. It sounded like possession disguised as fate. Alina left the shelter with two things: a fake ID bought with money she didn't really have, and a bus ticket paid for by a woman who didn't ask questions. She rode for 12 hours, her stomach twisting, her hands clasped over the small swell that didn't yet show. Asterisk every time the bus stopped. She held her breath, waiting for men in dark suits to step on board, but no one came. By the time she reached the new city, the sky was a pale gray, and she felt like she had stepped into someone else's life. She rented a small room, under someone else's name. She found work cleaning offices at night. She learned how to walk like she belonged, how to keep her eyes down but her ears open. Learned, quickly, that poverty had its own rules. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't noble. It was exhausting and humiliating in a way that had nothing to do with rags and everything to do with being invisible. And yet, there was something pure about it. No one cared who she had been. No one cared who she'd married. She was just another woman trying to survive. Her pregnancy progressed quietly, her body changing in ways that made her feel both powerful and terrified. She went to free clinics. She sat in waiting rooms full of women whose stories she didn't know but could feel anyway. Because pain has a way of making strangers into mirrors. At night, after cleaning offices, she would sit on her bed and press a palm to her stomach, whispering promises into the darkness. I'm here, she would say. I'm not leaving you. I don't care what I have to become. But sometimes, when the city was quiet, Alina would remember Dante's eyes. Not the cruelty, the control, and she would wonder what kind of man needed control so badly that he would throw rags at a bride instead of touching her. She told herself she didn't care. She told herself he was a monster and monsters didn't deserve her thoughts, but the human mind didn't obey pride, and there were shameful nights when Alina wondered what would have happened if she had stayed, if she had put on the rags, if she had let him win. The thought always ended the same way, with Alina sitting up, heart pounding, whispering, never, because she didn't run to become someone's lesson. She ran to become someone's future. The baby was born during a thunderstorm. Alina labored alone for hours, before the neighbor in the next room heard her cries and called an ambulance. In the hospital, under fluorescent lights that made everything look harsher. Alina squeezed the nurse's hand and bit back screams, her body splitting open into something raw and ancient. When the baby finally came with, furious, alive, the sound of his first cry cracked something inside her, a boy, tiny fists, dark hair, a face that looked like hers, and something else. The nurse placed him on Elena's chest, and Elena sobbed into his skin, shaking with relief and terror and love so sudden it felt like drowning. Hi, she whispered, voice breaking. Hi, my love. The baby's eyes fluttered, unfocused. Elena stared at him, memorizing every detail, because she knew the world could steal things. It had already stolen her old life. It had stolen her father's dignity. It had stolen her wedding night, but it would not steal this. She named him Nico. Not Nicholas, not after any man, just Nico. Short, sharp, bright, a name that sounded like a spark. In the weeks after his birth, Elena moved again. She changed cities, she changed jobs. She didn't post photos. She didn't make friends who asked too many questions. She lived like a ghost with a heartbeat in her arms. 4 years. That was her life. Survival, disappearing, working until her hands cracked. But Elena had one thing she hadn't had before. Purpose, and purpose does something dangerous to a person. It makes them willing to burn. When Nico was 3, Elena found a job in a small accounting office during the day. She was good with numbers. Always had been. Her father had insisted she'll learn, in case you ever need to run the business. The irony tastes a bitter now. Her boss, an older woman named Marisol, noticed Elena's skill and started giving her more responsibility. Elena learned how businesses hid money. How men lied on paper. How legitimate companies washed the dirty parts until they looked clean. She learned the language of power, not in guns and threats but in spreadsheets and signatures. And one night, while entering data long after everyone had left, Elena realized something. Dante Moretti's world wasn't just violence. It was finance. It was real estate. It was ownership, disguised as respectability if she wanted to be safe. She couldn't just hide. She had to become untouchable. And in a world like theirs, untouchable meant richer than the people who wanted to own you. So Elena began doing what desperate intelligence people do. She began planning. At first she took small risks. Side work, quiet consulting for small businesses, helping them find efficiencies, teaching herself investment basics from borrowed library books and late-night online videos. Then she took bigger risks. She started an LLC under her fake name. She bought a cheap, crumbling property in a neglected neighborhood, one no one cared about. She renovated it herself, step by step, with Nico playing on the dusty floor beside her while she painted walls and replaced broken fixtures. When she sold it for a profit, something inside her ignited. It wasn't greed, it was possibility. Elena did it again, and again she learned to see what others overlooked. A industry that would gentrify in 5 years, a building that was ugly now, but would become valuable when the city expanded. As she moved like a shadow through the market, quiet and relentless, turning survival into strategy. By the time Nico was 8, Elena was no longer cleaning offices. She was buying them. She still lived modestly. She still kept her name hidden, but her accounts grew. Her assets multiplied. Her influence expanded in ways that didn't announce themselves. And somewhere far away, in a different city where violence wore suits, Dante Moretti continued searching for a bride who had vanished like smoke. He didn't know she was building an empire out of silence. He didn't know she was becoming the kind of woman men like him feared most, the kind who didn't need protection, the kind who could buy it. 10 years after the wedding night, Elena stood in a penthouse she technically didn't own because it was held under a layered structure of companies, trusts, and legal walls designed to protect the person behind them. The penthouse overlooked the ocean, the city lights glittering below like spilled jewels. Nico, now 10, sat on the couch with a book in his lap, his brows furrowed in concentration. He had Elena's mouth, but his eyes were the kind of dark that didn't belong to her family. Elena watched him and felt the familiar dab of dread. He was getting older. He was asking questions now. Why don't we have grandparents? He'd asked once, too casually, as if he didn't care. Elena had smiled and said, some families are complicated. Nico had stared at her like he didn't believe in vague answers. He was brilliant, too observant, and Elena knew she couldn't keep the truth buried forever. But she also knew the truth wasn't just a story, it was a weapon, and if she told it wrong, it would destroy everything she'd built. That night, after Nico went to bed, Elena stood at the window with a glass of water. She didn't drink. Her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. Ms. Rivera, a man's voice asked. Elena's stomach tightened. Yes, we have an issue with one of your properties. Elena's mind sharpened instantly. Which one? The one in Westbridge. The one you acquired through the foreclosure auction. Last month, Elena's grip tightened on the phone. Westbridge was a key part of her next expansion. A neighborhood about to explode in value. She'd secured 3 buildings quietly, planning to develop them into mixed-use spaces. What issue? Elena asked. The man hesitated. A tenant dispute. But there's also someone else involved. Elena's heart ticked faster. Who? She demanded. The man lowered his voice. A man named Moretti. Elena went cold. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The ocean outside kept shimmering like nothing had changed. But everything had. Elena's voice came. not steady only because she forced it. What did you say, Moretti? The man repeated. Dante Moretti's people came to the site today. They said the building is under contested interest. Elena's fingers went numb. A decade. 10 years of silence. And now his name had found her again like a hand closing around her throat. She whispered, almost to herself, no. The man on the phone kept talking, but Elena barely heard. Her mind was already racing ahead. Calculating, strategizing, panicking. Because there was only one reason Dante Moretti would surface in her world now. He had finally traced her, and he wasn't coming to negotiate. He was coming to reclaim what he believed belonged to him, including the secret sleeping down the hall with a book on his bedside table, including the son who carried Moretti darkness in his eyes. Elena hung up without saying goodbye. She stood frozen in the penthouse, staring at the city lights until they blurred. Then she turned and walked to Nico's room. She pushed the door open quietly. Nico slept on his side, his hair falling across his forehead, one hand curled around the edge of his blanket like he was holding on to something, even in dreams. Elena's chest tightened, so hard it hurt. She sat on the edge of his bed and brushed his hair back gently. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Nico didn't wake. Elena stared at him, her mind splitting into two parts, one that wanted to run again, and one that knew running was no longer enough. Because she wasn't a girl with no resources anymore. She was a woman with assets, lawyers, influence. She had built herself into something formidable, but Dante Moretti had been formidable when she was young, and he would be worse now. Men like Dante didn't soften with time, they sharpened. Elena stood slowly, leaving Nico's room, closing the door behind her as if she could seal him away from danger. Then she walked back into the living room and opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside was a slim file, a sealed envelope, a photograph, a name written on paper in her own handwriting, Dante Moretti. Elena stared at the name until it felt like it was burning through the page, and she picked up her phone and made a call she'd sworn she'd never make again. Not to the police, not to a friend, to a man who dealt in secrets the way Dante dealt. In fear, when the line connected, Elena said, I need protection. A pause. Then the man's voice, wary. From who? Elena swallowed. From my husband. Silence, then quietly. Elena Valente is dead. Elena's eyes closed. She should have been, Elena whispered, but he's here, and if he finds my son, it's over. The man exhaled slowly. If Dante Moretti has found you, you're already in his hands. You just haven't felt the fingers yet. Elena opened her eyes, staring out at the city that had once felt like her escape. Then, she said, voice turning sharp with a courage born from years of surviving, teach me how to cut them off. The next morning, Elena walked into the Westbridge property herself. No entourage, no visible security, just her, dressed in a charcoal coat with her hair pinned back, her posture controlled. She needed to see it to confirm it wasn't some mistake. The building was old, brick, worn down but structurally sound, the kind of place Elena had learned to turn into gold. As she stepped out of her car, she saw them, two black SUVs parked at the curb like predators at rest. Men in dark jackets stood near the entrance, their eyes scanning the street with a professional, a boredom of people who knew they could kill if necessary. Elena's pulse didn't quicken, it slowed, because fear was useful only when it made you move. She walked toward the entrance. One of the men stepped forward immediately, blocking her path. Private property, he said. Elena lifted her gaze to his face. I own this property. The man's eyes flickered slightly, as if he wasn't used to women saying that. I don't know who you are, he said, but you need to leave. Elena smiled faintly. You do know who I am. You just haven't been told to say it yet. Man's jaw tightened. Then a voice came from behind him, low and calm, slicing through the air like a knife sliding out of a sheath. Let her in. Elena's entire body went rigid. She didn't turn immediately. She didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. But when she did turn, the world narrowed down to a single man standing near the SUV. Dante Moretti. 10 years hadn't saw him. That made him more dangerous in a quieter way. He wore a long black coat, tailored perfectly, and underneath it a dark suit that looked expensive without needing to show off. His hair was shorter now, his jaw heavier, his face marked with faint lines that suggested sleepless nights and decisions that had cost blood. His eyes, those same dark, controlled eyes, locked onto Elena like they had never let her go. Felt the past collide with the present so violently it It almost stole her breath. But she forced herself to stand tall. Dante's gaze moved over her slowly, taking in her coat, her posture, the calm on her face. Then his mouth curved just slightly. Not a smile, a recognition. You're alive, he said. Elena's voice came out even, disappointed. Dante stepped closer. The air shifted with him, like it remembered. No, Dante said. Surprised, Elena swallowed. Why are you here? Dante's eyes held hers. To bring my wife home. Elena laughed once, sharp and bitter. You threw rags at your wife, and then you let her walk out. Dante's gaze didn't waver, and yet here you are. Elena's smile disappeared. This building is mine. Dante's eyes flicked toward the brick facade. No. Elena felt anger flare. Excuse me. Dante's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it. You bought it. You hold paperwork. You think that means ownership. He stepped closer until Elena could smell him. Clean, expensive, faintly smoky. But in my city, ownership is decided by power. Elena's fingers curled inside her coat pockets. This isn't your city anymore. Dante's eyes narrowed. Then quietly, he said, it will always be my city. Elena felt her pulse beat in her throat, but she didn't move back. Because, if she moved back now, she would keep moving back forever. She lifted her chin. What do you want, Dante? For a fraction of a second, Dante's gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. I want, he said softly, to know why you ran. Elena's laugh died. The question hit differently than she expected, because it wasn't a threat, it wasn't an order, it was almost personal. Elena's voice lowered. You know why? Dante's expression tightened. See it? Elena's heart hammered. She could feel the men around them watching, listening, sensing that something more than business was happening. Elena forced herself to speak. I ran, she said, because you treated me like dirt on your shoe. Because you married me like I was a payment. Because you looked at me like you wanted to punish my father through my body. Her voice sharpened with truth. I ran because I was afraid of you. Silence stretched. Dante's jaw clenched so hard, Elena. So the muscle jumped up. Then Dante said something that made Elena's blood turn to ice. You should have been. Elena stared. And in that moment, she understood the truth she had avoided for 10 years. Dante Moretti hadn't thrown rags at her because he didn't care. He had thrown them because he did. Because in his world, cruelty was sometimes the only way to keep someone alive. Elena's voice came out quieter. What does that mean? Dante stepped even closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. My father, Dante said, wanted you dead before you even stepped into that church. Elena's stomach dropped. Dante's eyes darkened. He said the Valentes were weak. That taking you was unnecessary. That weakness spreads. Dante's gaze held hers. I married you to stop him. Elena's breath shook. Dante continued, voice low and controlled, like he was reciting something he had forced himself not to feel. But on the wedding night, Dante said, I had to show my father you meant nothing to me. Because if he thought I cared, if anyone thought I cared, then you would have been a hostage in my own house. Elena's hands trembled slightly. She forced them still. You could have told me, she whispered. Dante's eyes hardened. And you would have believed me. Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to say yes, but she remembered his coldness, his voice, the rags, the way he watched her walk out like she was nothing. Elena's silence was answered. Enough. Dante's mouth tightened. Then he said, you survive. That's what matters. Elena stared at him, feeling emotions rise like a storm. Anger, confusion, something dangerously close to relief. But then she remembered Nico, and relief turned into fear again. Because if Dante had wanted her alive, then what would he want now? Elena took a small step back. Dante watched her carefully. Come inside, Dante said. We need to talk. Elena shook her head. No. Dante's eyes narrowed slightly. Elena, hearing her name in his mouth, made her spine stiffen. I'm not your wife, Elena said. Dante's gaze dropped briefly to her left hand. No ring. He looked back up. You're still mine, Dante said quietly, in the only way that matters. Elena felt something crack inside her, because there was a time, long ago, when those words might have destroyed her. Now, they simply warned her. She met his gaze and said, if you want to talk, we'll do it on my terms. Dante's eyes flickered with something like amusement. Your terms, he repeated, as if tasting the concept. Elena held her ground. Dante studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded once. Fine, he said. Your terms. Elena didn't relax, because she knew men like Dante didn't agree unless agreement benefited them. And as Dante stepped aside to let her enter the building, Elena felt it deep in her bones. This wasn't a reunion. It was the beginning of a second marriage. One built not on innocence, but on power. Inside the building, the air smelled like dust and old wood. Elena walked up the stairs with Dante behind her, feeling his presence like a weight between her shoulder blades. They reached an empty unit, bare walls, exposed pipes, the skeleton of what Elena had planned to transform. Dante stepped in and closed the door. Behind them, the sound was final. Elena turned to face him. "What do you want?" she asked again. Dante's gaze swept over the space. "You built something." Elena's jaw tightened. "Yeah." Dante stepped closer, but not too close, like he was restraining himself. "How?" Dante asked. Elena's pulse quickened. "What?" Dante's eyes sharpened. "The girl who walked out of my hotel in a wedding dress shouldn't be standing here. 10 years later holding property in Westbridge." His voice lowered. "Unless someone protected you. Or unless you became dangerous enough to protect yourself." Elena's throat tightened, because he was seeing her, not as a bride but as a player. Elena forced a smile. "Maybe I'm smarter than you thought." Dante's mouth curved faintly. "I never thought you were stupid." Elena's breath hitched. The words shouldn't have mattered, but they did. Elena steadied herself. "If you came to take this building, you'll need to go through lawyers." Dante's gaze didn't shift. "I didn't come for the building." Elena's blood went cold again. She whispered, "Then why are you here?" Dante's eyes held. "Hers I came," Dante said softly, "because I heard a rumor." Elena's mouth went dry. "What rumor?" Dante took one step closer. "A woman," Dante said, "who vanished 10 years ago, resurfaced in my financial world. Quiet acquisitions, layered holdings, a ghost buying pieces of the city." His gaze darkened, and someone whispered that the ghosts had a child. Elena felt her heart slam into her ribs. Every nerve in her body screamed to deny it, to lie, to run, but she didn't move, because Dante was watching her too closely. He already suspected. Elena forced her voice steady. "People whisper nonsense all the time." Dante's jaw tightened slightly. Then he said, almost gently, "Elena." Her neigh again, this time softer, more dangerous. Elena's hands trembled, despite her efforts. Dante's eyes dropped to her stomach, not because she was pregnant now, but because the human mind reaches for patterns, for proof. Then his gaze returned to hers. "Tell me," Dante said, "that you didn't take something from me when you left." Elena stared at him. Her lips parted, but no words came. Because the truth would change everything, and lies might get her killed. Dante stepped closer. Close enough now that Elena could feel warmth radiating off him. His voice dropped into something intimate, almost like a confession spoken in reverse. "If you had a child," Dante said, "I would know." Elena's voice finally came out, sharp with fear. "You don't know everything." Dante's eyes flashed, then he smiled, slow, cold. "Certain. I know enough," Dante murmured, "and I will know the rest." Elena's stomach twisted because she suddenly understood what this was. Not a conversation, a hunt. And she was holding the most valuable secret in Dante Moretti's life. A secret with a heartbeat. A secret named Nico. Elena stepped back, putting space between them. "Stay away from my life," Elena said, voice trembling with fury. "You lost the right to it 10 years ago." Dante watched her, his expression unreadable. Then he said something so quiet, Elena almost missed it. "I didn't lose you," Dante said. "I'll let you go." Elena's laugh broke like glass. "How noble." Dante's eyes hardened. It wasn't noble. It was necessary. Elena's chest rose and fell too fast. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to hit him. She wanted God help her to believe him. But belief was dangerous, because belief could become softness, and softness had almost killed her once. Elena lifted her chin. "If you come near my child, if you even try," Dante's gaze snapped, sharp. "So it's true." Elena froze, her mouth closed. Too late. The silence became a confession. Dante went very still, as if his body had forgotten how to breathe. Elena saw something flicker across his face, shock, rage, something rawer than either. Then Dante's eyes darkened into something terrifyingly focused. "What is his name?" Dante asked. Elena's voice shook. No. Dante took one step forward, voice low. "Elena." She shook her head harder. "No." Dante's jaw clenched, and when he spoke again, his voice carried something Elena had never heard from him before. Not cruelty, not contempt. "Need tell me," Dante said. "What is my son's name?" Elena's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "He's not yours," Elena whispered. even as the lie tasted like poison. Dante's gaze locked onto her. You think I don't recognize my own blood? Dante said softly. You think I don't know what I am? Elena's breath shook. Dante stepped closer until she could no longer retreat without hitting the wall. His voice dropped into something dangerously intimate. I will not hurt him, Dante said, but I will find him. Elena's body trembled with rage and fear. You don't get to decide that, Elena hissed. You don't get to walk into my life after 10 years and claim anything. Dante's eyes held hers, and his voice turned colder. I don't claim, Dante said. I take. Elena's stomach dropped, because there it was, the Moretti truth. No matter what tenderness might exist inside him, no matter what regret he might carry, Dante was still the man who ruled by possession. And Elena realized with sudden clarity, she hadn't escaped him, she had only delayed him. Dante stepped back slightly, as if he was forcing himself into control again. Then he said, voice calm but deadly, bring him here. Elena's eyes widened. No. Dante's gaze sharpened. Not asking, Elena's laugh came out broken. You think you can order me? Dante's eyes flickered. I can. Elena felt something rise in her 10 years of survival. 10 years of building herself into someone who could stand in front of men like this and not collapse. She stepped forward, closing the space herself, staring up into his face. You want to see him? Elena whispered. Then you'll have to earn it. Dante's gaze darkened. Elena continued, voice trembling but fierce. You want to call him your son? Then you'll have to prove you deserve that title. Because being his father isn't about blood. It's about what you do with it. Dante stared at her for a long moment. The only sound was the distant hum of the city outside the building. Then Dante said quietly, you're not the same woman. Elena's mouth curved bitterly. No, I'm not. Dante's eyes stayed on her like he was memorizing the change. Then he nodded once. Slow. Fine, Dante said. I'll earn it. Elena didn't trust him, but she also knew something else now. Dante Moretti wasn't here just to reclaim, he was here because something inside him had cracked open at the thought of a son he didn't know, and cracks could be exploited. Elena met his gaze, her heart hammering. Then Elena said softly, why telling me why you really gave me rags? Dante's eyes went still, and Elena knew whatever answer he gave would either free her or destroy what little piece she had left.